Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. As you know, the New Brunswick Provincial Veterinary Laboratory was recently asked to investigate the cause of death for 2 dogs that had been in or near the St. John River. Following necropsy examination on the 2 animals, samples were sent for analysis at the Biotoxin Metrology Facility of the National Research Council in Halifax. We received notification of the results last night. The results confirmed that both dogs died following exposure to anatoxins. Anatoxins are the neurotoxins produced by cyanobacteria, more commonly referred to as blue-green algae. Samples of water, algae growing on the rocks, and mats of vegetation both onshore and on the water were collected by staff with the Department of Environment and Local Government. Those samples were also sent for testing by the National Research Council. All samples contained anatoxins, but the levels were particularly high in the samples from vegetation mats and the stomach contents of the dogs submitted for necropsy. Additional consultation with the owners of the dogs confirmed that 1 dog died after swimming near Hart Island, upriver from Fredericton. 2 other dogs that died following a visit to Carleton Park in Fredericton had not been observed swimming, but had been seen ingesting aquatic vegetation that had washed up on the shore. 2 additional dogs belonging to the same owners that were swimming, or the same owners were swimming in the river at the same time as these other dogs were there, and they showed no sign of illness. We would like to thank staff at the National Research Council's Biotoxin Metrology Research Facility for their work and all others who helped us as part of this investigation. So, Bruce, I'm done with my statement.
Thank you. I'd like to just make a few short, simple statements on cyanobacteria and its occurrence and our dealings with it in New Brunswick over the last few years. Cyanobacteria are naturally occurring in many types of water bodies throughout New Brunswick, including ponds, lakes, rivers, and other types of water. So they're naturally occurring. Their presence is not necessarily anything bad. Although naturally occurring, algal blooms have been observed in some of our lakes in recent years. Algal blooms in some of our lakes are very striking when you get a full bloom. Your lake can change color overnight from a nice blue water lake to bright green, and it looks like green paint has been poured on the surface of your lake. They're very striking, and that's a full algal bloom. And those are the things that are of concern to us, and those are the types of things that get reported to our department. Cyanobacteria can also form algal mats on the bottom of rivers. And those algal mats can come dislodged from the bottom of the river, and they form surfaces, algae on rocks and sediment. They can get dislodged and they can go downstream. That's another type of occurrence. It's not the type that we normally deal with that looks like the green paint on our lakes. So there's several modes of occurrence of cyanobacteria. Conditions for cyanobacteria growth include warm temperatures, lots of sunlight, low water levels, and nutrients. The particular nutrients that we're concerned about are phosphorus and nitrogen. So we currently now have the perfect conditions for the growth of cyanobacteria. Thank you.
Dr. Lente. Thank you, Dr. Goltz and Dr. Fox. First, on behalf of the Department of Health, I want to offer my sympathy to the families of the dogs that perished recently. It is not lost on us that these animals are important members of New Brunswick households, and we know it has been a difficult time waiting for answers about what led to their deaths. We also acknowledge that this story has resonated with all New Brunswickers. We understand the concern about what happened and if there are possible dangers to human health. The Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health shares those concerns. That is why we were part of the investigation to determine what these deaths could mean for people. Based on the results of the investigation, which have been already shared by Dr. Goltz, the Department of Health feels that the best advice for the public continues to be what we have shared in the past couple of weeks. At this time, I will take a moment to reiterate that advice, which we encourage all New Brunswickers to follow whenever entering a natural body of water, whether or not there is a known issue. The most important thing for public health is that we continue to encourage people to be active and enjoy the outdoors. Often the harms from not being active vastly outweigh any risk associated with entering a natural body of water. That being said, as conditions change frequently in natural bodies of water, there is always a risk that comes with their contact. People can take precautions that will help reduce the potential for health impacts. There are steps people should always take to decrease the risk of becoming ill when entering any recreational body of water. Step 1 is to always take a visual scan of the water before entering. If there are any signs of abnormal smells or color, you should not enter the water. Step 2, if you feel it is safe to enter, make sure to never swallow the water. Step 3, bathe or shower shortly after contact with the water to remove anything that could be irritating. And do not enter the water if you have open wounds or cuts. By following these general precautions, the risk of being exposed to biological hazards will be reduced. To be clear, while it has been determined that blue-green algae is present in some areas of the St. John River, we are by no means saying that you cannot continue to use the river for recreational purposes such as swimming. The river is a vast, flowing, and is always changing. It is likely that any presence of blue-green algae is intermittent at any one site. We want people to understand that there's always a risk of having contact with any natural body of water. Please follow our guidelines anytime you use them. Because natural bodies of water change so frequently, there will not always be a sign, a posting, to alert people to the potential risks. We ask New Brunswickers to consider the advice and to use their best judgment in determining if the risk is elevated in a certain location. The Department of Health remains committed to protecting the health of New Brunswickers, and we will continue to take any steps necessary to alert the public of potential impacts to people's health. Thank you.
Okay, we'll open it up. Jane?
Yeah, have we ever had any records of humans being either harmed, poisoned, or died as a result of poison blue-green algae?
There are case reports in the literature of people being quite ill from blue-green algae, but that's after consuming it by drinking water that has blue-green algae in it at very high levels. And very rarely, some case reports where people who have relied on dialysis and have had their dialysis or treatment of fluids affected by blue-green algae become quite ill. But it's quite rare in the literature because some of the physical characteristics of blooms that were described, that they're foul smelling, they look a funny color, prevent most people from getting in and being exposed to it.
Any of that happened in this province?
Not that I'm aware of.
I'm also curious, do we know of an effect on either wildlife that has been a detriment to their health downriver, upriver, as well as the livestock, the cattle that are on the islands of the St. John River? Are those at risk? Dr. Gold?
Certainly, any species of animal could be at risk from cyanobacterial toxins in the right setting, but at this point in time, I am not aware of any incidents of any mortality that's happened in wildlife, and those usually would come to my attention fairly quickly, either directly or indirectly. And as for domestic animals on the islands, in theory as well, those could be at risk from cyanobacterial toxins in the right setting. The thing about islands, though, most of them have a good flow of water on either side of them. So when the animals go down to drink, the conditions that favor the growth of cyanobacterial organisms, the proliferation of them and their toxins, wouldn't be present at those sites.
How big of a concern in a flowing river is it? Obviously, with my lack of understanding of blue-green algae, I appreciate that it can be more in lakes, but in a flowing river, how big of a concern is that?
It is a concern, and they are different modes of occurrences, and each one of them present challenges on how we monitor, how we collect the samples, but you are correct. It can be in a river, if you can just envision this, a river that has a quiet cove, for example. Yes, out in the middle of the river, the water's flowing away and everything, but a certain wind direction, cyanobacteria on the surface can get blown into that cove, and you will see that green-like, paint-like on the surface. You can see it, for sure. The other one that's not as straightforward in terms of visual is the algae, the cyanobacteria on the bottom covering the rocks. You know, not everybody's going to see that. But if it gets dislodged and goes down the river, you will see it as clumps of brown, dark, organic material, and it can also get washed up on the shoreline, and you know, in the heat and the sunlight, when it starts to decay, you get that smell, musty basement smell. But no, it's a concern in flowing rivers as well, yeah.
What type of testing has been done in the past, and is there going to be more testing following these discoveries?
We have an algal bloom protocol with Department of Health. We currently collect samples for cyanobacteria identification when we get a report of an algal bloom. So we currently carry out that program. We have carried it out for the last number of years. When we collect a sample, this is in partnership with Department of Health, so when we get a report of an algal bloom, we go out, we have emails back and forth, we're talking to each other on our phones. When we visit, go out in the field, we ask that a public health inspector as well comes out with us. We send samples off, we share the data. We'll continue to carry out that program for sure as we move forward.
Was there any report of an algal bloom in the area prior to these dogs, the incident with these dogs?
No, not to my knowledge, no.
I have a question.
You had mentioned that we're kind of looking at a perfect storm here where weather conditions are great for these growths, but also nutrients. Is it possible that nutrients count is high, phosphorus, nitrogen, because of the floods bringing nutrients upriver down to here?
Nutrients are in all our water bodies, and algae and cyanobacteria are naturally occurring. So there's a dynamic that's constantly going on there where nutrients are consumed, they're using sunlight, they're growing, it's a dynamic system. If we were to talk about, for example, our lakes and having a full algal bloom, if the lake turned completely green and literally looked like paint was poured on it, we look for a couple of things. We look for the potential of increased nutrients in those water bodies. But it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to have an increase. As long as there's a level that will maintain that growth, the trigger doesn't necessarily have to be an increase in nutrients. The sunlight and the warmth can also be contributing triggers. I'm a believer that the flood and the nutrient load did not cause anything, but everything working together. The nutrients, the low water levels, the heat, the sunlight, it's all contributing. So we've had floods every year. This year was a bad flood, but yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Should dogs be going in the river? Dr. Coles?
Yep. We did a little preparation on this one just because we know people will ask. The risks of cyanobacterial toxicity are associated with warm, shallow water, shorelines, winds blowing onshore, green scum or film on the water, ingestion of the water, and ingestion of aquatic vegetation. And all of these risks are increased with small body size. So as for health, we don't say that animals shouldn't be going in the water, but We feel that owners should ensure that pets are kept under close supervision when they're at the water or near shore. You should prevent pets from consuming aquatic vegetation on shore or in water, because it was these mats of vegetation that had the highest levels of toxins associated with them. And we think that you should definitely prevent pets from swimming or drinking water in areas where the water has this green discoloration or smells bad, or at some of the higher risk locations where the toxin has been shown to be present. Reducing the amount of time that dogs are in the water will reduce the risk, as it minimizes the potential for the consumption of toxin in water. And this is especially important for small dogs.
Steve? No, I'm good. I'll ask another one, I guess. Based on this organism's life cycle or whatnot, how long can we expect this to be a risk in the season?
The presence and the growth of cyanobacteria in the St. John River would not surprise me at all that it's been there in previous years and it will be there in future years. The conditions that contributed to this occurrence, this certain situation, that's a lot of things have to line up to make happen what we just went through in the last couple of weeks. So you know, there's always risk, but what I'm trying to say is I don't think this just came last month and next month it's gone.
Given that it's warm and there's a lot of sun, is there a point where cyanobacteria isn't as abundant and its blooms are not as healthy in, say, September or, you know, when things cool off?
In theory, that makes sense. In practice, algal blooms can occur in northern Canada as well, even under the ice. So, you know, these things have been around a lot longer than we have, and they're going to outlast us on Earth. But no, in New Brunswick, we've observed algal blooms and have reports into October, and you know, I don't have all the dates, but it wouldn't surprise me into November, where you would normally think she's starting to cool down, but.
Alan?
Just to clarify, I apologize for mistaking off the top. So the two dogs, and I was just confused on the wording of the same owner.
Okay, yep. So, so 4 dogs had belonged to the same owner, had gone to Carleton Park. 2 of the dogs swam in the river, they were fine. The 2 other dogs were not seen to go in the river, but were seen eating some of the aquatic vegetation that had washed up on shore. Both of those dogs died very shortly after. Then at the other site at Hart Island, the owner there had 2 dogs. One dog went into the river and swam. That dog died. The other dog stayed on shore. It survived and did not get sick. Sorry for the confusion.
Anything else? Steve, last time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, doctors.
We really appreciate your coverage of this. It's important to get the message out to the public, and thank you.